Live to the UK now, where I can talk to former British ambassador to Libya, Oliver Miles. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on RT. How would you assess the Russian special envoy's efforts to mediate peace in Libya?
Well, I think they're very welcome. I think he's got a very difficult task because at the moment the two sides are very far apart. But I think there's got to be a negotiation, and if Russia can mediate, can find a way to bring the two sides together, that will be fine. I'm not clear that what Russia is doing is very different from what President Zuma of South Africa has been trying to do, or also Turkey has been trying to do. But why not? I think it's good news that Russia is trying.
Do the rebels really want to negotiate? After all, they clearly want the NATO campaign to continue with the aim of ousting Gaddafi. A ceasefire for them, I suppose, wouldn't be what they want, would it?
Well, there's no ceasefire on offer, as a matter of fact, not a real ceasefire. We've had ceasefire declarations from Gaddafi before, and the fighting went on. If there was a real ceasefire, then that would be a different matter, but that would have to be planned, notified in advance, and it would have to take place. There hasn't been any ceasefire. The trouble with the negotiating positions is that at the moment they seem to be absolutely contradictory. On the one side you have the revolutionaries or rebels or whatever we're calling them in Benghazi, whose requirement is that Gaddafi should go. And on the other side you have Gaddafi, whose requirement is that Gaddafi should stay. Now even Russia isn't going to be able to find a compromise on that very easily, but a compromise will come one day.
Can you tell us about your experience with Gaddafi? Of course, you were the ambassador there in Libya. What do you make of his current behaviour?
Well, I wouldn't put too much weight on my personal experience because it was a long time ago and it was quite limited. I wasn't ambassador for very long because I had to break off relations when the Russians murdered a policewoman in London. When the Libyans murdered a policewoman in London.
Yes.
Well, I think Gaddafi is very tough. He's been defending himself against all kinds of attacks over many years. He's been in power now for 40 years. He's very skilled at protecting himself, and it won't be easy to persuade him to go. But in the end, I think his support will wither away, and he will go. And Russia, I think, also, as well as the Western powers and the Arabs, has said that he must go. That's the only way that a solution will be reached. But he's not ready for it yet. If Russia can find a way to persuade him to go, that's great.
You raised that pertinent point. He's been in power for 40 years. And the UK is saying that Gaddafi's got to go so that the Libyan people, can determine their own future. But the question is, since he has been in power for 40 years, is there really an opposition there? Is there somebody who could really replace him? Somebody that can be produced that quickly in such a short amount of time?
No, there certainly isn't anyone who could replace him. He's unique. Nobody will want to replace him. But of course there will be a future after Gaddafi, naturally, as there is in every country. This is quite common when you have a powerful leader who's been in position for a long time. People will say, what will happen when he goes? You know, it was the same with everyone from Stalin to Nasser to Sadat. Wherever you go in the world, you find this phenomenon. But there will be a future for Libya after Gaddafi, don't worry.
You've held talks with Libya's foreign minister recently, I understand. What was your goal there? What were you trying to achieve?
Well, those talks were private, and I wasn't attending them on behalf of the British government. We were doing, I think, essentially the same thing that Mr. Margelov is probably doing now, which is to see whether there is a way through. What we were told from the Libyan side is that Gaddafi is ready to give up power, but he's not ready to leave Libya. That won't be enough to satisfy the opposition at the moment. There has to be a compromise, and as I say, if Russia can find one, that's good. I think the South Africans have a chance. They've tried to persuade Gaddafi to accept some solution or other. There are legal complications as well as political ones. South Africa's position is slightly different from that of Turkey or Russia. It's worth trying.
Rather than looking ahead, let's look at the present now. This NATO campaign in Libya is aiming to protect civilians, but as we heard in the report a little earlier, the bombings are seeing parts of the country's infrastructure destroyed. How much patience do you think the Libyan people will have with NATO's methods?
Well, first of all, it's slightly misleading to talk about NATO because don't forget that the Arab League is also involved. We've got Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Jordan taking part in this operation, so it's not simply a NATO operation. The second point to make is that you get a very different account of this depending who you talk to. If you're in Tripoli, I've no doubt you're told that it's very destructive, that people are being killed and so on. If you go to Benghazi, you're told that it was only the intervention of NATO, and that's the word they use, which prevented what they call a mini Rwanda, in other words, a genocide, when Gaddafi was aiming to destroy the people of Benghazi. So it's the usual thing. In a war, you get different stories from the two sides.
The UK has said just finally that it's prepared for this campaign to go on. There is no time limit. It was announced just 2 or 3 days ago. I'm sure you're asked this question many times in your capacity as a former British ambassador to Libya. People asking you, look, how long do you see this going on for? How will it end? When will it all end?
Well, I think that the way it will end is that Gaddafi's support will melt away. If you think about the way that things are going at the moment, we keep hearing small items of news, like, for example, defections of army officers across the border into Tunisia, or the defection of the former governor of the central bank or the former chairman of the National Oil Corporation and so on. This is bad news for Gaddafi's supporters. There isn't any good news. So it's not, although there's a standoff between the two sides, the tendency is in one direction. It's sliding in the direction of Gaddafi having to go. I believe myself that there will be a standoff for some time. I hope it won't be very long, but it may be quite a long time. And then in the end, his position will be so weak that he has to go. When will that happen? I really don't know. It's like pulling a cork out of a bottle. You pull and you pull and you pull, and then suddenly, pop, out it comes.
So interesting to hear what you have to say. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us live there from Oxford. Oliver Miles, former British ambassador to Libya. Thank you.